Welcome to E Street Arts' Sounds of New Briggate, a podcast series hosted by local people with local stories that celebrate a unique and vibrant high street in the heart of Leeds, New Briggate. With each episode, we spotlight a different aspect of life on New Briggate and its fascinating history. In this episode, we're joined by Steve Crocker to explore New Briggate Blues, Studio 20, and the birth of jazz in Leeds.
Hi, my name is John Toolan from Chapel FM, presenter of Left of Leeds. Today I'm interviewing Steve Crocker from Jazz Leeds about the jazz history of New Briggate. It's part of a project by East Street Arts looking at the history of the New Briggate area of the city and its role in the artistic and cultural development of Leeds. Hi Steve.
Hi John, great to be here.
So first of all, for those who don't know Leeds, what area are we talking about?
Well, it's the bit between the Head Row and Merrion Street and Vicar Lane, and it includes the Central Arcade. It's the area that's got the Domino Club, the Cellar Bar, the Howard Assembly Room, the Belgrave, and in the past it's been to the home of events at the Leeds Odeon, Studio 20, places like the Coconut Grove, and it's also the birthplace of one of Leeds' best-known jazz musicians, Ivy Benson.
So why is that area important, do you think?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think every city has got its sort of jazz area. If you look across to New York, it's got 52nd Street and Broadway. In New Orleans, it's got the French Quarter. There's the Left Bank in Paris, and of course Soho in London. And they tend to be areas of cities which are or were cheap to rent, cheap to live in, and they often got shifting transient populations. They're often quite a bit edgy, a bit dirty, a bit grimy, but with lots of clubs and bars and nightlife. And New Briggate was like that in Leeds. Of course, it's not all of what goes on in the city in terms of jazz. You know, Leeds is the city which boasted the first jazz school in Europe, the Leeds Music College. It's had venues like the Adelphi, the Underground, the Trades Club, where Leeds Jazz started, the Astoria, the Irish Centre, through to places today, such as Seven Arts in Chapel Ellington, Heart in Headingley, Hyde Park Book Club in Hyde Park, and the traditional jazz venues, which are still active in Leeds, in Pudsey and Boston Spa. But I suppose what we say is that the area around New Briggate was, and it still is, a melting pot where you can go from club to concert to bar and catch some music of really high quality.
So you mentioned Ivy Benson. Can you tell us a little bit more about her?
Yeah. She was born in 1913 in her grandparents' pub, the Malt Shovel in Lower Head Road, which was near the corner of Vicar Lane. It's all gone now, it's all been cleared during slum clearance. In the 19th and 20th century, that was a pretty rough area. It was poor quality buildings, and the further east you went in the city, actually, the rougher it became, which is why the original Millgarth police station was built on the eastern edge of the city centre, because that was where a lot of the crime and the problems were. Anyway, Ivy Benson's father, Dougie Benson, were known as Digger. He worked originally as a riveter, but he also doubled as a musician, playing trombone in the pit at the Empire Theatre in Briggate, which is where Harvey Nichols is today. And he was later to feature in and run his own dance bands in Leeds. But when Ivy was 6, the whole family moved to Beeston, 59 Cemetery Road, which has now got a big blue plaque on it from Leeds Civic Trust. And she went to the local school St Luke's. And from the start, her father had musical ambitions for her. She had piano lessons age 5. He taught her the clarinet and the trombone, and she was a born performer. When she was 9, she featured on BBC Children's Hour radio programme, singing In a Persian Market. A year later, in 1923, she won a talent contest at the Empire in Leeds, singing Yes, We Have No Bananas. She acquired a Benny Goodman record and fell in love with jazz, and that inspired her to take up the clarinet and later the saxophone, mostly then and even now regarded as an instrument which is played mainly by men. She won a scholarship to Leeds College of Art and she left school at 14, but money was short, so she went to work at Montague Burton's huge factory on Hudson Road in Bermontoft at 15 shillings a week, which meant she could save up for her first alto sax. She worked there 8 to 6 and then played at dances most nights from 8 p.m. through to 2 or 3 in the morning, because dancing in the 1930s was all the rage. In the end, it was too much and she left the factory, and she joined the Leeds-based Rhythm Girls band and worked with them until she was at 23. She got the chance to go to London, where she was spotted by band leader Teddy Joyce and toured with his band, the Girlfriends, who often came back to Leeds, as the featured soloist. And she was known as the ace saxophonist of Great Britain. When the Second World War began, with many male musicians leaving for the front, she formed her own all-girls band, and with the help of impresario Jack Hilton, was booked into Covent Garden, which had been converted into a ballroom. And in 1943, they got the coveted top job of the BBC House Band, based in Bristol, broadcasting all hours of the day and night to troops as well as home audiences. In 1944, she was invited by Field Marshal Montgomery to fly to Berlin for the Victory in Europe celebrations. And she offered, and Ivy Benson and the Rhythm Girls offered quite a sensational combination of musicianship and glamour. They all played brilliantly, they all looked like film stars, and they had to behave themselves too. They worked hard and they played hard, and she had a constant turnover of band members who often left to get married. And she recruited from the northern brass bands, and she gave many women the first chance of an exciting life as professional musicians.
Steve, one famous club during the 1950s and the 1960s was Studio 20. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, the Studio 20 was really interesting. It was the big jazz venue in Leeds during the 50s and 60s. And although there were dance bands in Leeds earlier, before the Second World War, there was mainly dance bands rather than jazz bands. But jazz in the form of traditional jazz really arrived in Leeds in the 1950s. Trad jazz was the British take on early Dixieland style, but it was very, very popular, especially amongst students who looked to America for something different. And it remained important until the late 1950s, when rock and roll really took over. One of the most famous of those early bands was the Yorkshire Jazz Band, who we heard right at the start of the programme, led by guitarist and banjo player Diz Disley, who went on to enjoy a glittering career spanning folk and jazz until his death in 2010. And also Leeds' legendary trombonist Ed O'Donnell. There's also a rumour that their Depp banjo player was Peter O'Toole, the actor who also used to play jazz as well, and came up once or twice to play with the Yorkshire Jazz Band. The tuba player in the group was a guy called Bob Barclay, and he went on to become the seminal figure in Leeds jazz in the 1950s. He was the promoter, and he opened Studio 20. It's the only club in Leeds that was really dedicated to jazz. It had jazz and skiffle, and it was down on New Briggate, down in a cellar, like all good jazz clubs should be. It had no licence for alcohol, although it was subject to occasional police raids, and bands used to play there till the early morning. Musicians often dropped in after playing at the Town Hall or the Odeon next door. The music ran 7 nights a week, often going on as long as people were prepared to play, the jam sessions lasting all night. Musicians would find their way to the club after their regular gigs, which was pretty early in those days. And Studio 20 was a jazz sanctuary in Leeds for musicians. A whole gallery of major names played there. Humphrey Lyttelton, George Melly, as well as modern stars like Ronnie Scott, Tubby Hayes, Sarah Vaughan, who was a visitor, Jimmy Rushing, Big Bill Broonzy. They all appeared at Studio 20. The club was a labour of love for Bob Barclay, and it was documented in terms of photographs by Terry Cryer, who was then a young photographer, later went on to become a very famous professional photographer. And it's been the setting also for crime novels. Chris Nixon's Dark Briggate Blues was based around Studio 20. And of course now it's the location for the Cellar Bar, which is great because that's a jazz club as well. Still has weekly jazz on Tuesday nights run by sax player James Mannering, and fortnightly Sunday evening jazz sessions.
Steve, just round the corner from Studio 20 was the Leeds Odeon. So how did that fit into the history of jazz in the area?
Yes, it's now Sports Direct, which is probably a bit less salubrious in terms of jazz. But it was the big venue for music in the 1950s and 60s. It was the place where people like Sarah Vaughan would do a concert, Dave Brubeck, and famously the Duke Ellington Orchestra in 1958 played there. This is a really interesting concert because George Lascelles, the Earl of Harewood, who was a cousin of Queen Elizabeth, was a keen jazz fan. and he was also the musical director of the Leeds Music Festival. In 1958, it was the 100th anniversary of the Town Hall in Leeds, and he wanted to make a big splash. So he had confirmation that the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were going to join the celebrations in Leeds. So he set about booking the Duke Ellington Orchestra for the event. And that was to mark the end of the Leeds Music Festival. There was a gala reception organised at the Town Hall. The Queen wasn't able to attend the performances by Duke Ellington. However, Prince Philip, accompanied by British composer Benjamin Britten, attended the afternoon performance on the 18th of October 1958 at the Odeon. And then later that evening, Duke Ellington was invited to join the other distinguished performers and composers featured in the festival to the Lord Mayor's reception. Ellington arrived in a limousine dressed in a white tie and tails, showered the waiting crowds outside the hall with kisses, and then after a round of speeches, the group were invited to meet the royal party assembled in the line. And Ellington was at the end of the line, and the Queen spoke at length with him. And he famously said, "I got stage fright for the first time in my life. I couldn't think of a thing to say. She was wonderful. As a matter of fact, I was the last person on the line, and she was kind of relaxed when she got to me. And we talked about her family, her father, King George, her uncle, Prince Edward, and the Duke of Kent, who I'd met on a previous occasion. She said, 'Is this your first time in England?' 'Oh,' I said, 'my first time in England was in 1933, way before you were born.' And she gave me a real American look. Very cool, which I thought was too much. And despite his nerves, the Queen and the Duke Duke Ellington were very much at ease with each other's company, and it had a profound effect meeting the Queen in Leeds, and it inspired Duke Ellington to write a suite in her honour. Which was there was only ever one version of it made, and it's not been played right up until the 1990s by full orchestras with full audiences. And it was recorded and sent to Buckingham Palace by Duke Ellington. And this tune is called The Single Petal of the Rose. It's among the most beautiful and personal melodies the Duke ever wrote.
Steve, of course, one thing Leeds is famous for is the Jazz College, the Leeds College of Music.
Yes, it opened in 1965 and it offered the first jazz and light music course ever to run outside America. The original venue was the Mechanics Institute, which was just nearby New Briggate, in Cookery Street, which is now the City Museum. And one of the leading lights in the early years was bassist Peter Ind, who had lived and worked with the best in 1950s New York, including Miles Davis and Charlie Parker, and he was one of the originators of the Cool School. He played extensively with pianist Lenny Tristano and saxophonist Lee Konitz, and also the swing ear tenor sax pioneer Coleman Hawkins. Peter Inn recorded extensively with Lee Konitz, who became a lifelong friend, and with Warren Marsh, and with vocalist Sheila Jordan and others, as well as doing the sound engineering for New York label Bethlehem and for Verve Records. So in 1965, Peter Ind returned to the UK, and with fellow bassist Bernie Cash, he brought the Tristano method of teaching to Leeds College of Music. It represented an alternative to bebop, with complex changes of time signature, experimental free performances and advanced ear training. It pointed the way to the similar sort of experiments which were being carried out by Charlie Mingus and Ornette Coleman. Now, Leeds College of Music has provided a steady output of jazz students in Leeds for over 50 years now. Alan Barnes, Chris Batchelor, Dave Newton are all trained here, famous musicians now on the UK jazz scene. In 1920, it was renamed as Leeds Conservatoire and now has a diverse portfolio to include music and drama and the other arts. And one of the famous people who was there, now very famous in the jazz world, is Nikki Iles, who is a piano player, recorded with lots and lots of people, and is now musical director of one of the best big bands in Europe, the NDR Big Band.
Now, what about yet another Leeds innovator, Steve, Xero Slingsby?
Yes, Leeds' famous jazz busker. And the link between Xero, Slingsby and New Briggate is that he did a lot of his buskings around the Leeds arcades. And as busking in the 1980s was illegal, and it was Xero's passion, it would lead him to get something like 45 court hearings for illegal busking. But he was pretty undeterred, and many Leeds jazz fans relish and cherish their own anecdotes of Xero's busking in the 1970s and the 1980s. He's part of Leeds' popular folklore. He had immortal tunes, including snappy titles like Shove It, Tom Waits for No Man, and Up Down, as well as the more rhetorical ones, Out to the Indoor, Hurricane Damage in Leeds, and Shoveling Cement in the Dark. And these titles give an insight, I think, into Xero Slingsby's style of playing. Very punchy, very humorous, soulful, rhythmic, melodic. And it was punk, basically, punk jazz, with the influence of players such as Thelonious Monk, Roland Kirk, Eric Dolphy, Ornette Coleman, all evident in his style. His tunes, like all good tunes, reflect inner city Leeds. It was area-based, and it reflected his own life. And at the peak of his career, he performed with the anarcho-syndicalist collective The Works. The trio were sellout in concerts in venues in Leeds and around the north, and also across the Channel in Belgium, in Holland, in Germany, and Switzerland, where their music is still played regularly. He also was a very great innovator in terms of music or instruments. He had something called the pandemony phone and the bike pumper phone and various other purpose plumbing items, which are still heard on his album. And just recently, his widow Sally Coe and Robert Crampton have made a full-length documentary feature on him, which was featured at the Leeds International Film Festival in 2022, which celebrate Xero Slingsby's short but stellar life, his family, and his career.
What about jazz today in Leeds?
Well, there's a wide range of jazz promoters in the city, John, as you know, because you have them on your radio programme here. It's a home to all sorts of DIY jazz, people putting on contemporary funk, blues, improv, traditional jazz. Some of those places are in the new Briggate area, such as the Belgrave Music Hall, which is first originally opened its doors as a children's palace in the 1930s, and then became a three-storey recreation and nursery school. And it then was taken over by Ash Kalowski and Simon Stevens, who were also behind the Hedgerow House building and Water Lane Boathouse. And they've had, over the past 9 years, they've had the World Island Festival, Sun Ra and his orchestra, Sons of Kemet, Headhunters, Pharaoh Sanders. And then there's the Domino Club, which is a speakeasy on the Grand Arcade. You go through the hairdressers and you go down some steps at the back into a cellar bar with live jazz, soul, reggae and blues. You can pretend you're in New York. It's great. And it features brand names in the past such as Chip Wickham and Matthew Halsell. Then there's the Howard Assembly Rooms, originally a meeting room for events. It was then the Plaza Adult Cinema. And as part of the Grand Theatre, it offered a rehearsal room for Opera North. It's embraced jazz as well, and people like the Necks, John Schofield, Bill Frisell, Hurricane, the Mingus Bigband, and Ambrose Akinmusire have all played there. In 2019 and 21, it's refurbished with a new entrance, education studio. It received a personal gift of £11 million from Dr. Keith Howard OBE, which was thought to be amongst the largest private donations ever made to the UK arts outside London. So there's lots going on in the New Briggate area still today. And of course, that's not it, because elsewhere in Leeds you have, the organisation Jazz Leeds, which is the one I'm very much involved in at Seven Arts. We do 140 gigs a year, and we run the Jazz Leeds festivals in 2018 and 19, and now get involved with the Leeds Jazz Festival, which includes concerts in Cookridge Street, which is next to the New Briggate area. And we also do joint events with the Howard Assembly Room in New Briggate. There's also, of course, Fusebox, which is Leeds has always had a strong scene of improvising musicians. And today you've got people like Laura Cole, Dave Kane, Emil Carson, Matt Bourne and Chris Sharkey, all still going strong with performances. You've got loads of other clubs as well. You've got the Hyde Park Book Club in Hyde Park. You've got DJ Luby with his jazz series at the Broodnell. Jazz at Heart in Headingley. Traditional jazz in Pudsey. And in terms of other things, like they've got Jumbo Records, which is a great friend of jazz. One of the best music shops in town is still going and still active in the Merrion Centre. Apart from that, you've got some really good, well-known national names now in Leeds. You've got Jasmine Myra on saxophone. She's just been signed by Gondwana Records. Ben Powling, who tours with the World Service Project and runs his own band Viper Time. Fergus Quill, double bass player, runs the Imaginary Bigband, the Fergus Quill Trio. And he's recently won lots of accolades, including the Musicians Company Award, the Tina May Jazz Award, and he's been part of the Serious Productions Take 5 group of musicians. Then you've got people like Dave Evans, who was previously the organiser of the Garfa Arts Festival, which featured people like Hugh Masakela in the past. Dave is a musical educator and piano player. His group Obunye won the Parliamentary Jazz Award for the Best UK Jazz Ensemble in 2023. And people like Emma Jane Thackeray, who was Leeds-born powerhouse trumpet player, nominated for national awards and very much the darling of Jazz FM. She was born in Morley, started a musical journey like so many people did in brass bands. She was a principal cornet in the Tingley brass bands. So there's a lot to celebrate in Leeds. There's a lot still going on in the new Briggate area. It's a fantastic area for the arts. But Leeds itself is one of probably the best jazz centres in the north of England.
It certainly is, and I think what should we finish off with, Steve? Shall we listen to some Arlen Parks?
Yes, this Arlen Parks is playing at the Howard Assembly Room on the 10th of March 2024, so there'll still be some great stuff going ahead in New Briggate in 2024.
Thanks very much, Steve.
This podcast was written and researched by Steve Crocker, with contributions from John Toolan and produced by East Street Arts and Chapel FM. Hidden Histories of New Briggate is supported by Leeds City Council and Historic England as part of the New Briggate High Street Heritage Action Zone Regeneration Programme. To find out more about the project, visit www.eaststreetarts.org.uk.